I'm Amber Mitchell, 32 years old. Standing in my empty apartment after finally breaking free feels both terrifying and liberating. My phone buzzes for the 15th time today, Mom again. I can still hear her ultimatum echoing in my mind. Either you give your sister the money, or you're no longer part of this family. So I chose myself for the first time in my life. That was 3 years ago. Today, I'm a millionaire, and my family is broke. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If this sounds like your family drama too, hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, what happened next will make you question everything you thought about family loyalty. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home outside Boston shaped everything about who I am today, both the wounds and the strength. Our family looked picture perfect from the outside: hardworking father, stay-at-home mom, and 2 daughters close in age. But appearances can be deceiving. My father, Richard, was a dedicated accountant who worked 60-hour weeks. He provided well financially but was emotionally absent, coming home exhausted and retreating to his den most evenings. I remember waiting by the window for his car to pull in, hoping for just a few minutes of his attention, but usually going to bed disappointed. My mother, Diana, ran our household with an iron fist and clear favorites. From my earliest memories, it was obvious Rachel, my sister, who's 2 years younger, was the golden child. The evidence was everywhere. Rachel got the larger bedroom with the bay window, while I had the converted storage room. When we went back to school shopping, Rachel received brand-name clothes while I got the discount rack. My mother always explained it away. Rachel needs more confidence, or Rachel has a different body type than you, sweetie. By age 8, I had become an unofficial third parent in our home. I packed lunches, helped Rachel with homework, and made sure she got to the bus on time while Mom slept in. When Rachel forgot her science project, I was the one who rushed home during lunch to deliver it. When she had a meltdown before her dance recital, I was the one who calmed her down while Mom fretted about her costume. When I turned 10, I'd been begging for a small birthday party for months. Mom had finally agreed to let me invite 5 friends for pizza and cake at our house. Nothing extravagant. The morning of my birthday, Mom announced the party was canceled. Rachel had been offered a spot in an advanced dance class, and the registration fee was due immediately. "We'll celebrate your birthday next weekend," Mom promised. We never did. The pattern continued throughout our school years. Rachel struggled academically but was popular and athletic. I excelled in school but was quieter with just a few close friends. When Rachel brought home C's, she received praise for trying her best, and rewards to keep her motivated. When I brought home straight A's, it was expected, no celebration necessary. By 14, I had started working weekends at a local bakery, saving every dollar for college. I knew early on I would need to fund my own education. Meanwhile, Rachel went through 3 different sports, quitting each one when it became too hard or boring, with hundreds of dollars of equipment abandoned in the garage. In high school, the contrast between us sharpened. I joined debate club and business leadership, aiming for college scholarships. Rachel became a cheerleader and dated the quarterback, coming home past curfew without consequences. I began managing the school store, showing an early knack for business. Rachel crashed my father's car and received a newer replacement. The family dynamics taught me crucial lessons. I learned to be self-sufficient because no one else would prioritize my needs. I developed resilience from constantly being compared and found wanting. Most importantly, I recognized that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough to compete with Rachel's place in our family. By graduation, I had saved nearly $12,000 from various jobs, maintained a 4 gigapascals, and secured a partial scholarship. Rachel had a scrapbook full of party photos, 3 totaled cars on her record, and parents who had already promised to pay her full college tuition anywhere she got accepted. The foundation was set for everything that would follow. My college years at Massachusetts State University were a balancing act of academics, multiple jobs, and stretching every dollar. My partial scholarship covered about 40% of my tuition, and my savings handled the first year's remainder. For everything else, I worked 20 hours weekly at the campus bookstore, plus weekend shifts at a local restaurant. Meanwhile, Rachel attended Briarwood College, a private school costing 3 times what my education did. Our parents emptied their savings account for her first-year expenses, buying her a new MacBook, furnishing her dorm room like a luxury apartment, and giving her a generous monthly allowance. When I visited her campus once, I found her room littered with unworn clothes still sporting price tags. I majored in business management with a minor in digital marketing, fascinated by the emerging online business landscape. I joined the Entrepreneurs Club and met Professor Jenkins, who became my mentor. Under his guidance, I developed my first business concept during junior year, specialized planners for college students with ADHD and anxiety. Having struggled with organization myself, I created a prototype combining traditional planning with visual cues and stress management techniques. Rachel changed her major 4 times in 2 years, from psychology to communications to art history to business, which she chose because it sounded easy enough. She joined a sorority that consumed most of her time and money. When she called me crying about failing midterms, I stayed up all night helping her study via video chat. When I called her the following weekend, she was too busy at a sorority retreat to talk. By senior year, I had launched a small run of my planners, selling them to students in the Disability Resources Office. I reinvested every profit into the next batch, refining the design based on user feedback. I graduated with honors, a promising business concept, and 3 job offers. I accepted a position at Meridian Marketing, a mid-sized agency that would allow me to learn the industry while continuing my planner business on weekends. Rachel took 6 years to graduate with a general business degree and a GPA that barely cleared the requirements. At her graduation dinner, which our parents drove 4 hours to attend, the conversation centered entirely on Rachel's accomplishment of finally finishing and her plans to find herself before job hunting. My recent promotion to junior account manager warranted only a passing "That's nice, dear" from my mother. After graduation, I rented a small 1-bedroom apartment near my office. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, the first space I'd ever had that was truly my own. I furnished it with secondhand finds that I rehabbed on weekends, painted the walls a calming blue, and set up a dedicated corner for my growing side business. Rachel moved back into our childhood home, converting the dining room into her bedroom because her old room was too small. She cycled through several jobs, quitting each one for various reasons. The manager was mean, the hours were brutal, the work was beneath her education. Our parents adjusted their lives around her, converting Dad's den into Rachel's creativity space for a brief period when she decided to become an artist. I received my first major promotion at Meridian after landing the Johnson account, a local business that grew their revenue by 40% using my marketing strategy. I began investing a portion of each paycheck, first in a retirement account, then in carefully researched stocks. My planner business expanded to 3 neighboring colleges. The family tension escalated during Thanksgiving that year. I brought a homemade pumpkin pie and news of my promotion to senior account manager. Rachel arrived 4 hours late, empty-handed, with an announcement that she'd been discovered by a boutique that wanted to sell her handmade jewelry. My parents spent dinner discussing Rachel's big break, asking me only if I could hook her up with your marketing connections. The jewelry business folded 2 months later, when Rachel lost interest in production deadlines. Christmas that same year marked another turning point. Rachel received a new car from our parents to help with job interviews, while I received a department store sweater still bearing the clearance tag. When I mentioned putting a down payment on a condo, my mother laughed and said, "Always the serious one, aren't you? You should learn to live a little like your sister." I drove home that night realizing our paths weren't just different, they were diverging in ways that would eventually force a reckoning. Rachel met Bradley Winthrop at a charity gala she attended as a Friends Plus One in the spring. Bradley came from old New England money banking and real estate, and worked at his family's investment firm. Tall, conventionally handsome, and driving a Tesla, he checked all Rachel's boxes. They were dating exclusively within 2 weeks and engaged 3 months later. The princess-cut diamond on Rachel's finger cost more than my annual salary. When she flashed it at the family dinner announcing their engagement, my parents gasped appropriately. Mom immediately started talking about venue options while Dad smiled nervously. I recognized his expression as the one he wore when calculating expenses in his head. "Amber will be your maid of honor, of course," Mom declared, not bothering to check with either of us. Rachel and I made eye contact briefly across the table. We hadn't had a meaningful conversation in over a year, but she nodded enthusiastically. "Wouldn't want anyone else," she said, though her eyes didn't quite meet mine. What followed was 8 months of wedding planning insanity. Rachel wanted a fairy tale wedding that seemed to grow more elaborate by the day. The initial guest list of 150 ballooned to 275. The simple, elegant venue became the Grand Wellington Hotel, the most expensive in the city. The dress budget tripled after Rachel fell in love with a designer gown from New York. When I gently questioned the escalating costs during a bridesmaid's lunch, suggesting Rachel consider what she and Bradley could realistically afford, my sister burst into tears. "I can't believe you're trying to ruin this for me," she sobbed. "This is my one special day." My mother called that evening furious. "How could you upset your sister like that? If you can't be supportive, perhaps you shouldn't be in the wedding party." I swallowed my concerns and apologized, then proceeded to plan an extravagant bridal shower at an upscale restaurant and a bachelorette weekend in Miami that maxed out my credit card. Throughout it all, Rachel complained the events weren't quite what she'd envisioned, while my mother reminded me that this is the only wedding Rachel will ever have. A month before the wedding, I visited my parents' house to drop off some shower gifts. I found my father at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, looking ashen. When I asked what was wrong, he quickly gathered the documents. "Nothing to worry about," he said unconvincingly. But I'd seen enough statements from their retirement account, home equity loan paperwork, and credit card bills with alarming balances. My parents had drained their savings and gone into significant debt for this wedding. That same day, I discovered Rachel had secretly opened 3 new credit cards to pay for wedding extras. She didn't want our parents or Bradley to know about custom monogram napkins, upgraded floral arrangements, a surprise vintage car for the exit. She was already nearly $30 0 inches debt before even walking down the aisle. "Bradley doesn't need to know," she told me dismissively when I confronted her. "His family has money, and once we're married, it'll all work out." "Have you met his parents?" I asked. I'd noticed Bradley's family seemed conspicuously absent from the planning. "They're just very busy," Rachel said, avoiding my eyes. The wedding day arrived, a $100,000 spectacle, with ice sculptures, a 10-piece band, and centerpieces taller than some of the guests. Bradley's family attended, but seemed uncomfortable with the opulence. I overheard his father telling someone they had offered the couple a generous down payment for a house instead of a lavish wedding, but they chose this route instead. During the reception, after several glasses of champagne loosened my restraint, I asked my mother how they had managed to afford everything. Her answer chilled me. "Your father took an early withdrawal from his 401k. We'll figure it out." Rachel deserved her dream day. When I expressed shock at their decision, pointing out the tax penalties and their proximity to retirement age, my mother's expression hardened. "You've always been jealous of your sister. Not everyone values money over happiness like you do, Amber. Some of us understand what family means." I spent the remainder of the reception in a fog, smiling mechanically for photos while mentally calculating how many years my parents had just added to their working lives. As I watched Rachel and Bradley drive away in the vintage Rolls-Royce, I couldn't shake the feeling that this fairy tale ending would eventually reveal itself as fiction. 6 months after the wedding, cracks in Rachel and Bradley's marriage became impossible to ignore. What began as occasional tense exchanges during family dinners escalated to Rachel calling me in tears over misunderstandings about their finances. "Bradley is so controlling," she complained. "He actually asked me why I needed another pair of shoes yesterday, as if I have to justify every little purchase." I later learned that another pair referred to her 15th shoe purchase that month, and little purchase meant $800 designer heels. Rachel had continued her pre-wedding spending habits, but now with access to joint accounts that Bradley monitored. "Have you two discussed a budget?" I asked carefully. "God, you sound just like him," Rachel snapped. "I didn't get married to live like I'm poor." Despite my misgivings about their relationship, I was genuinely shocked when Rachel started hiding purchases from Bradley. She had shopping bags delivered to our parents' house, removed tags and placed new items among her existing clothes, and opened a secret credit card that she had statements sent to a P.O. box. When I cautioned her that financial dishonesty could destroy her marriage, she dismissed my concerns. "Bradley makes plenty of money. He just doesn't understand that certain things are necessities for a woman in my position." At a family dinner in early spring, Rachel announced she was pregnant. Our mother burst into tears of joy, and our father opened a bottle of expensive champagne he'd been saving. I noticed Rachel didn't drink any, but Bradley emptied his glass quickly and reached for a refill with a strained smile. That same night, my mother pulled me aside to discuss plans for converting their home office into a nursery. "We're thinking of the Versailles collection from Baby Elegance. It's pricey, but nothing's too good for our first grandchild," she gushed. When I suggested waiting until Rachel was further along before making major purchases, my mother acted as if I'd suggested canceling Christmas. 2 months later, everything imploded. Bradley discovered Rachel's hidden credit card while organizing tax documents, and the $23,000 balance she'd accumulated in just 8 months of marriage. During their confrontation, Rachel also confessed to the previous debt she'd brought into their marriage without disclosure. Bradley left that night, and Rachel showed up at our parents' doorstep with 4 suitcases and a sob story about how Bradley had gone crazy over a few shopping trips. She moved back into her old bedroom, and our parents rallied around her without question. Bradley froze their joint accounts and stopped payment on their credit cards. When Rachel tried to make a purchase and her card was declined, she called him screaming, which only hardened his resolve. He filed for separation the following week, citing financial infidelity and irreconcilable differences. Rachel was stunned when she received the legal papers. "He can't just leave me, we're having a baby," she wailed. Our parents convinced her to fight back hard, ignoring the prenuptial agreement she'd signed. "Those things can be broken," my father insisted, despite having no legal expertise. Rachel begged me to ask my friend Melissa, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm, for advice. Reluctantly, I arranged a meeting. Melissa reviewed the prenup and delivered the harsh truth. The agreement was ironclad, especially regarding financial dishonesty. Rachel had no claim to Bradley's family money or business interests, and her spending habits would not reflect well in court. Rachel didn't speak to me for a week after that meeting, as if the legal reality was somehow my fault. Then came the most devastating news amid all the stress. Rachel miscarried at 11 weeks. She called me from the hospital inconsolable. "This is Bradley's fault," she sobbed. "And yours too, for not supporting me. If you had just helped me fight him instead of taking his side, I wouldn't have been under so much stress." My parents reinforced this narrative, treating me like I had personally caused both the marriage breakdown and the miscarriage. My mother refused to speak to me directly for nearly a month, relaying messages through my father instead. The divorce was finalized quickly, with Bradley's family connections expediting the process. Rachel received a modest settlement that would last perhaps a year if managed carefully. She spent half of it in the first month on a healing vacation to Hawaii and a complete wardrobe refresh that she claimed was necessary for her new chapter. By the time the dust settled, I had become the family scapegoat. According to their version of events, I had failed to support Rachel during her crisis, sided with that awful man over my own sister, and contributed to her suffering through my cold, practical attitude. The fact that I had warned Rachel about her spending, suggested financial counseling before things imploded, and tried to get her qualified legal advice was conveniently forgotten. The experience left me shaken but resolute. For the first time, I saw with perfect clarity how the family dynamic would never change. Rachel would always be the victim who needed rescuing, and I would always be expected to either assist in the rescue or be blamed for the need for one. In the first place, 1 year after Rachel's divorce, I found myself at a crossroads professionally. Meridian Marketing had offered me a significant promotion to Director of Digital Strategy, but the timing coincided with an opportunity I'd been quietly developing on the side. My planner business had evolved into a digital marketing consultancy focused on small businesses. I had 5 regular clients I managed on evenings and weekends, each paying retainers that together nearly matched my day job salary. A business incubator program had accepted my application, offering mentorship and a small investment if I committed full-time. After weeks of deliberation and financial planning, I took the leap. My resignation shocked my colleagues, who saw me turning down a corner office and substantial raise to gamble on a startup. My boss, whom I deeply respected, pulled me aside on my last day. "I think you're making the right call, Amber," she said. "You've got something special. Just remember me when you're running an empire." I named my company Mitchell Digital Strategies and worked from my apartment for the first 3 months, reinvesting every dollar of profit. By month 4, I had hired my first employee, a talented graphic designer named Lisa, who complemented my strategic approach. By month 6, we had outgrown my living room and leased a small office space. As my business flourished, I renovated my apartment, replacing the second-hand furniture with carefully chosen pieces that brought me joy. Nothing extravagant, just quality items I expected to keep for years. I also treated myself to a reliable new car after my old one finally gave out, choosing a practical mid-range model with good safety ratings. Meanwhile, Rachel remained unemployed, still living with our parents 15 months after her divorce. She had briefly worked as a receptionist, but quit after 3 weeks because the office manager micromanaged her. She had taken a real estate course but never followed through with the licensing exam. Her divorce settlement was long gone, and she had opened new credit accounts despite her previous financial disaster. My father's health began to deteriorate during this period. What started as just stress was diagnosed as high blood pressure, then prediabetes, then a minor heart condition requiring medication. He should have retired at 65, but continued working full-time at 67, trying to rebuild the retirement savings that had been depleted for Rachel's wedding and subsequent support. When I noticed his worsening condition during a rare family dinner, I offered to help with his medical expenses. My mother's reaction was swift and cutting. "We don't need your charity, Amber. Your father enjoys working. Not everyone is obsessed with money like you are." I bit my tongue, knowing my father had been talking about retiring for years before financial reality made it impossible. The dinner conversation quickly shifted to Rachel's latest job prospect, an interview at a friend's boutique that apparently warranted more discussion than my thriving business or my father's health. As my company grew, so did Rachel's resentment. When Mitchell Digital was featured in a local business publication highlighting promising startups, Rachel called not to congratulate me but to complain that my success made her look bad to her friends. "Some of us are still trying to figure things out," she said acidly. "Not everyone can be perfect like you." The tension peaked when I brought my boyfriend James to a family birthday celebration for my father. James was a software engineer I'd been dating for 4 months, intelligent, kind, and supportive of my ambitions. Within minutes of our arrival, Rachel had positioned herself next to him, touching his arm while laughing at his comments and asking detailed questions about his work while ignoring me completely. When James mentioned he was developing an app, Rachel gushed, "That's so interesting. Maybe you could help me with a business idea I have." We should get coffee sometime to discuss it. My mother watched this display with amusement, later commenting that Rachel and James really hit it off as if I hadn't been sitting right there. When James politely mentioned how proud he was of my company's growth, my mother changed the subject, asking Rachel about her recent haircut. After that dinner, I made a conscious decision to limit my family interactions, focusing instead on building my business and relationship. I declined Sunday dinners more often, sent gift cards for smaller occasions rather than attending in person, and scheduled brief coffee meetings with my father when I knew my mother and Rachel would be out. The strategy worked well until Mitchell Digital landed Brookfield Industries, a client 10 times larger than any we'd previously secured. The local business magazine ran a feature about our innovative approach to their digital transformation, including a photo of me and my now 15-person team in our expanded office space. The day the article was published, Rachel showed up unannounced at my office, causing a scene in the reception area that my entire staff could hear. "Family emergency," she told my startled office manager. "I need to see my sister immediately." When I emerged from a client call to find Rachel pacing my lobby, her face flushed with emotion, I knew something had snapped. I ushered her into my private office where she unleashed a torrent of accusations. "You've always thought you were better than me," she hissed. "Now you're just flaunting it with these articles in your fancy office while I'm struggling. You've abandoned the family. You barely even call Mom anymore." When I pointed out that phone lines work both ways and my family rarely showed interest in my life, Rachel's eyes welled with tears. "You have everything, and I have nothing," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you know how that feels? To watch your sister succeed at everything while you're a complete failure?" For a moment I felt a flicker of the old guilt, the lifetime of conditioning that made me responsible for Rachel's feelings. Then I remembered the years of manipulation and realized this was just another performance. "Rachel," I said gently but firmly, "I'm in the middle of a workday. I have a team counting on me and clients waiting for deliverables. We can talk about this later if you want, but right now you need to leave." "Typical," she spat, grabbing her purse. "Your precious business always comes first. God forbid you spare 5 minutes for your family." She stormed out, slamming my office door so hard the glass rattled. 3 hours later, my mother called, berating me for humiliating Rachel and being selfish with my time and money. I ended the call after 5 minutes, turned off my phone, and took my team out for drinks to celebrate our new client. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding. My success would never be celebrated by my family. Instead, it would always be perceived as a personal attack on Rachel, a reminder of what she could have achieved, but didn't. And as long as I remained within their orbit, I would be expected to diminish my light so Rachel could shine brighter in comparison. The call came at 1:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was reviewing contracts for a new client when Rachel's name flashed on my screen. I nearly declined it, our last interaction at my office still fresh in my mind, but something told me to answer. Amber, Rachel's voice was thick with tears. "I need help." Over the next 20 minutes, between sobs and accusations that I never picked up when she called, this was her first attempt in months, Rachel revealed the extent of her financial disaster. After bouncing between our parents' house and a series of friends' couches, she had finally rented an apartment 6 months earlier. Now she was facing eviction for non-payment. "I'm 4 months behind on rent," she admitted, "and 3 months on my car payment. They're going to repossess it next week if I don't catch up." As she continued talking, the full picture emerged. Rachel had accumulated nearly $15, 0 inches, urgent debt, rent, car payments, utility bills, and high-interest payday loans she'd taken to temporarily cover expenses. She had no savings, no income beyond sporadic babysitting gigs and creditors calling daily. "I need you to loan me the money," she said, her voice suddenly steady. "Just until I get back on my feet." "That's a significant amount," I said carefully. "Do you have a plan for how you'll pay it back?" The question triggered an immediate shift in her tone. "Are you serious right now? You have plenty of money. I've seen your office, your car. $15,000 is nothing to you. It's not about whether I have it, I explained. It's about finding a sustainable solution. If I just hand over the money without addressing the underlying issues. Oh my God, Rachel interrupted. You're going to lecture me about financial responsibility. I'm about to be homeless, Amber. I took a deep breath. What if instead of cash, I pay for you to work with a financial counselor? Someone who can help structure a debt management plan and— I don't need a counselor, she shouted. I need money. Why are you being so selfish? This is what family does. They help each other. I am trying to help, I insisted. But giving you money without a plan is like putting a bandage on a broken arm. Rachel's laugh was bitter. You've always been like this. Cold, calculating, thinking you're so much smarter than everyone else. Her voice cracked. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that you'd let your own sister end up on the street. Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat in my quiet apartment staring at the phone, a familiar knot of guilt and frustration tightening in my chest. The next morning I had 3 missed calls from my mother, and a text demanding I call her immediately. When I did, her voice was ice. How dare you refuse to help your sister after everything we've done for you? Mom, I offered to help, just not by handing over cash with no accountability. She needs money, not a lecture from her little sister who got lucky in business, my mother snapped. Your father and I have already maxed out our credit cards trying to keep her afloat. We remortgaged the house last year. There's nothing left. This was news to me. You remortgaged, Dad's supposed to be retiring soon. How will you? That's not your concern, she interrupted. What concerns me is that you're sitting in your fancy apartment with your successful business while your family struggles. What kind of person does that make you? Mom, I said quietly, giving Rachel money without addressing her spending habits won't solve anything. It's just enabling. Enabling, she echoed incredulously. She's your sister, not an addict. Financial behavior can be addictive too, I tried to explain. I'm happy to pay for financial counseling for all of us. We don't need counseling. Your sister needs cash to avoid eviction. Period. The conversation continued in circles for nearly an hour. I offered alternatives, paying her rent directly for 2 months while she job hunted, covering the cost of career coaching, even letting her stay in my spare room if she enrolled in financial management classes. My mother rejected each proposal, insisting only an immediate cash transfer would suffice. Your father's health is getting worse from the stress, she added, her voice lower. His doctor said another cardiac event could happen any time if he doesn't reduce stress. Is that what you want? The manipulation was obvious, but knowledge didn't make it hurt less. Of course not. I've offered to help with his medical bills multiple times. Then help now, she said. $15,000. That's what Rachel needs to clear everything up and start fresh. And next month, next year, this cycle will just continue. There was a long silence before my mother delivered her ultimatum. Either you give your sister the money by Friday or you're no longer part of this family. I mean it, Amber. No more holidays, no more birthdays, no contact. You decide what matters more, your money or your family. The call ended with her promise to expect my decision by Friday. I sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking as I processed what had just happened. After 32 years it had come down to this. My family had put a price tag on my membership. $15,000 to maintain my place in the Mitchell family. As the shock faded, a strange sense of clarity emerged. I realized I'd been paying a different kind of price my entire life, sacrificing my self-worth, bending to manipulation, and accepting that I would always be less valued than Rachel. Perhaps it was time to calculate whether that relationship was worth the cost. The days between my mother's ultimatum and Friday's deadline passed in a blur of sleepless nights and inner turmoil. I canceled meetings, delegated urgent tasks to my team, and spent hours staring at my financial accounts, calculating how a $15,000 withdrawal would affect my business reinvestment plans. The money itself wasn't the issue. My company was doing well enough that I could afford it. But every time I prepared to make the transfer, something stopped me. I'd spent my whole life being the responsible one, the fixer, the provider. If I gave in now, where would it end? James came over Wednesday night with takeout and listened as I circled the same arguments repeatedly. Unlike my family, he asked questions rather than offering judgments. What happens if you give them the money? He asked. Rachel stays in her apartment, keeps her car. Things go back to normal, I said. And normal is? I thought about it. Rachel continues spending without consequences. My parents keep enabling her. I become the family ATM. What happens if you don't give them the money? This question was harder. My mother cuts me off. Maybe my father too, though I think he'd try to maintain contact secretly. I lose whatever family I have left. James nodded. So the real question isn't about $15,000. It's about whether you're willing to pay any price, financial and emotional, to maintain relationships with people who consistently devalue you. Put that way, the answer became clearer. I spoke with my therapist the next day, who helped me work through the grief and guilt that clouded my thinking. By Thursday night, I had made my decision. Friday arrived. I did not transfer the money. The reaction was swift and severe. My phone exploded with notifications. 12 missed calls from my mother, 8 from my father, 23 text messages from Rachel, ranging from pleading to vicious. I read none of the texts fully, just enough to see they followed the pattern I had predicted. My father's voicemail was the hardest to hear. Amber, it's Dad. I don't understand what's happening between you girls, but your mother is beside herself. I thought we raised you better than this. Call us, please. The subtext was clear. I was the problem. Not the unreasonable demand, not the ultimatum, not years of favoritism and enabling. Me. Around 7 p.m., my building security called to inform me that a woman claiming to be my sister was in the lobby demanding to be let up. When I declined, Rachel apparently created such a scene that they threatened to call the police. Only then did she leave. She returned an hour later, somehow gaining access to my floor, likely by following another resident through the secure door. I opened my apartment door to her pounding fists. Rachel looked terrible. Mascara streaked down her face, hair disheveled, eyes wild with a combination of rage and desperation. You've ruined everything, she said, pushing past me into the apartment. They're changing the locks tomorrow. My car gets repossessed on Monday. All because you won't help your own sister. Rachel, I offered multiple ways to help. You and Mom rejected all of them. Because they weren't actual help, she shouted, pacing my living room. You just wanted to control me like you always do, with your superior attitude and your perfect life. The confrontation escalated as years of resentment poured out from both sides. Rachel accused me of always thinking I was better than the family, of abandoning them when I became successful, of being cold and unfeeling. I countered with examples of how I'd been treated as less important my entire life, expected to achieve independently, while watching Rachel receive endless support despite her choices. Then Rachel said something that stopped me cold. Mom always said you owed us because they spent more on me. That the least you could do was be grateful for what you got instead of complaining about what you didn't. What? It's true, Rachel continued, a cruel satisfaction in her eyes at my shock. When we were teenagers and you'd get upset about me getting a car while you took the bus, Mom would tell me not to worry about your jealousy. She said some kids just cost more to raise, and you were lucky they could afford to give you anything at all with how expensive I was. The revelation shouldn't have hurt after so many years, but it did, a final confirmation of what I'd always suspected but hoped wasn't true. My place in the family had always been conditional, secondary, an afterthought to Rachel's needs and wants. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Not without the money. There is no money, Rachel. Not for this. Her face contorted with fury. You selfish bitch. You'd let your own family suffer just to prove a point. As she stormed toward the door, she grabbed a crystal vase James had given me for our 6-month anniversary and hurled it against the wall. It shattered spectacularly, water and flowers scattering across my hardwood floor. "Enjoy your perfect life," she spat, slamming the door so hard a framed photo crashed to the floor, glass cracking like a spider's web across my smiling face. The aftermath of that confrontation was 2 weeks of silence, the longest I'd gone without contact from my family since leaving for college. No calls, no texts, no emails, just a void where demands and guilt trips had previously filled my inbox. I used the time to process with my therapist and lean on James and friends for support. Part of me hoped the silence meant my family was reconsidering their approach, perhaps even recognizing the toxicity of their ultimatum. Then came the email sent anonymously but obviously from Rachel or my mother, containing links to social media posts. My family had taken their grievances public, posting detailed, if wildly inaccurate, accounts of how I had abandoned them in their time of need, how my greed had left my sister homeless, how success had changed me into someone who forgot where she came from. The posts had dozens of sympathetic comments from extended family, friends, and community members who had known us for years. People who had watched me babysit their children, who had attended my graduation, who had congratulated me on my business, all now offering consolation to my family for having such a heartless daughter divided by sister. The public shaming campaign worked better than they could have known. A client who attended my parents' church canceled our contract after hearing disturbing things about my character. A potential investor backed out of a meeting citing concerns about company values. The boutique owner who had rented space in my office building cornered me in the elevator to ask if the rumors about me leaving my family destitute were true. It became clear that staying in Boston would mean constantly defending myself against a narrative I couldn't control. Each explanation would only fuel the drama. Each denial would look like confirmation of guilt. Meanwhile, my business was suffering from the distraction and local reputation damage. James and I had been discussing moving in together, and he had recently been offered a position at a tech company in Chicago. What had been a someday possibility suddenly became an immediate solution. "Come with me," he suggested one night as we scrolled through Chicago apartment listings. "Mitchell Digital can operate anywhere. We can start fresh." 3 weeks later, I had sublet my apartment, arranged remote work protocols for my team, and packed essential belongings into a moving truck. I left Boston without saying goodbye to my family, knowing any attempt at explanation or farewell would only result in more manipulation and pain. As the skyline of my hometown disappeared in the rearview mirror, I felt a complex mixture of grief, relief, and something unexpected hope. For the first time in my life, I was choosing a path based solely on what was right for me, unburdened by family expectations or obligations. Chicago would be a new beginning, a life without the weight of being Rachel's sister, Diana's less favored daughter, the family ATM, or the perpetual disappointment. Just Amber Mitchell, entrepreneur and woman of worth regardless of what anyone else believed. The Chicago skyline greeted James and me with its imposing architecture and promise of new beginnings. We found an apartment in Wicker Park, a 2-bedroom with enough space for both of us to work from home when needed, in a neighborhood filled with other young professionals and creative types. While James transitioned smoothly into his new role at Tech Forward, my business faced immediate challenges. Despite the digital nature of our services, Mitchell Digital had relied heavily on local connections and word of mouth in Boston. My established clients stayed, but their Chicago-based contacts were hesitant to work with an unknown transplant. "It's just starting over," I reminded myself during particularly discouraging days. "You've done that before." I reworked our marketing strategy, positioning Mitchell Digital as a boutique agency, specializing in digital transformation for traditional businesses adapting to online markets, a niche particularly relevant in post-pandemic Chicago. Instead of competing with established local agencies, we offered specialized services they overlooked. The approach worked better than I had anticipated. Within 4 months, we had secured 5 new Chicago clients, including a family-owned furniture business that had operated for 80 years without an online presence. Their successful digital launch was featured in a local business publication, bringing more attention to our work. As the business stabilized in its new environment, I found myself with time and mental space to process what had happened with my family. My therapist helped me recognize that cutting ties hadn't been a failure on my part, but a necessary boundary against people who saw me primarily as a resource rather than a person with inherent value. Healthy relationships aren't transactional, she reminded me. Love shouldn't come with a price tag. During this period of personal healing, my business insights seemed to sharpen. Working with small business owners struggling to manage their operations efficiently sparked an idea for a software solution, an app that would simplify financial management for entrepreneurs without accounting backgrounds. I sketched the initial concept during a weekend getaway with James to Michigan's wine country. By Monday morning, I had a rough prototype that I shared with my most trusted clients for feedback. Their enthusiasm convinced me to pursue development. I hired a small team of developers and invested a significant portion of my savings into building what would become Mindful Money, an intuitive financial management app specifically designed for small business owners. Unlike corporate accounting software, it focused on cash flow visualization, tax preparation guidance, and simple profit forecasting. 6 months into development, while presenting the beta version at a Chicago tech meetup, I was approached by Elaine Winters, a partner at Blue Harbor Ventures. She had been searching for exactly this type of solution for their portfolio companies. Most founders are visionaries, not accountants, she explained. But financial mistakes kill startups faster than bad products do. Your app solves a real problem. 2 weeks and several meetings later, Blue Harbor offered a $2 million investment to complete development and scale the app nationally. The deal included resources beyond capital office space in their downtown location, access to their network of business advisors, and introductions to potential enterprise clients. The day I signed the investment agreement, James proposed. He had planned an elaborate rooftop dinner overlooking the Chicago River, but rain forced a change of plans. Instead, he asked me to marry him in our living room, surrounded by takeout containers and development notes for Mindful Money. "I want to build a life with someone who builds things that matter," he said, holding a simple solitaire ring. "Someone who knows her worth and stands by her principles even when it's difficult." That's you, Amber. The following year passed in a whirlwind of growth, personal and professional. Mindful Money launched to enthusiastic reviews, quickly acquiring 10,000 users in its first quarter. Mitchell Digital expanded to a team of 28, with specialized departments handling various aspects of digital marketing for clients across the Midwest. James and I purchased a brownstone in Lincoln Park, spending weekends restoring original features while modernizing systems. We discussed future children, agreeing that we would build a family based on mutual respect and unconditional love, a deliberate contrast to my upbringing. I had no contact with my biological family during this time, though occasionally I would search their names online to ensure they were alive and well. Rachel had apparently found work at a friend's boutique, according to her sparse social media. My parents' profiles remained private, their lives continuing without my participation. During a business trip to New York, I encountered a familiar face in the hotel bar: Bradley Winthrop, Rachel's ex-husband. The initial awkwardness quickly dissolved into surprisingly comfortable conversation. "I heard you left Boston," he said, nursing a scotch. "Smart move." Bradley shared updates on his life: remarried to an architect, expecting their first child, still working in the family business, but now heading their charitable foundation. When I cautiously asked if he ever heard anything about Rachel, he nodded. "Your parents contacted my family last Christmas asking for financial assistance. Apparently they're facing foreclosure on their house. Medical bills, they said." My stomach tightened. "My father's heart condition. That, and your mother was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer last year. They depleted their savings for treatment." The news hit me harder than expected. Despite everything, these were still the people who had raised me, however imperfectly. And Rachel, I asked. Bradley's expression tightened. Still the same. She's been through 3 more jobs since we split. Last I heard she was living with your parents again, claiming she needed to help care for your mother, but really just avoiding rent. I thanked him for the information, and we parted amicably, both acknowledging that some chapters of life are better left closed. Back in Chicago, I found myself distracted by thoughts of my father's worsening health and my mother's cancer. I had achieved success beyond what I'd imagined possible when leaving Boston. My app company now valued at $20 million. Mitchell Digital thriving personal happiness with James. Yet the news left me unsettled. On my 35th birthday, I received a feature in Entrepreneur magazine, highlighting female founders transforming traditional industries. The article mentioned my background, my escape from Boston, and the success that followed. I wondered if my family would see it, what they would think. That same week, I established a scholarship for young entrepreneurs from challenging backgrounds, 5 full-ride college scholarships annually for students demonstrating resilience, innovation, and financial need. The application form included an essay question. Describe a time when you chose your own well-being despite pressure to do otherwise. As I reviewed the first batch of applications, many from young people who had faced family expectations far more difficult than mine, I recognized that my journey from scapegoat to success story wasn't just personal vindication, it was potentially a roadmap for others trapped in similar dynamics. I slept better that night than I had in months, finally understanding that leaving hadn't been an act of selfishness or abandonment as my family claimed. It had been necessary self-preservation, and ultimately the foundation for creating something meaningful that could help others. The peace lasted until the following morning when an email appeared in my inbox with a subject line that made my heart stop. Your mother has cancer. Please come home. The email from my father was brief but devastating. Amber, your mother's cancer has returned and spread. Doctors give her months. Whatever happened between us, she's still your mother. Please come home. 2 days later, I found myself in a rental car outside the house where I grew up, steeling myself for whatever awaited inside. The property looked neglected, peeling paint, overgrown lawn, sagging gutters. The foreclosure Bradley mentioned was clearly imminent. I knocked instead of using my old key, feeling like a visitor rather than a returning daughter. My father opened the door and I barely recognized him. In just 3 years, he had aged a decade. Hair, completely white, posture stooped, face deeply lined. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. You came, he whispered, pulling me into a hug that felt both familiar and foreign. The inside of the house was worse than the exterior, cluttered, musty, with obvious signs of deferred maintenance. He led me upstairs to my parents' bedroom where my mother lay propped against pillows, thin and pale. Her reaction to my presence was complicated, surprise, relief, and something harder to name that might have been shame. Amber, she said softly, reaching out a hand that seemed too frail to belong to the woman who had delivered that ultimatum 3 years earlier. Rachel arrived 20 minutes later, stopping short in the doorway when she saw me sitting beside our mother's bed. She looked remarkably unchanged, perhaps a bit heavier, dressed in clothes that still bore designer labels despite their slightly worn appearance. What is she doing here? Rachel demanded, ignoring me completely and addressing our father. I asked her to come, he replied wearily. This isn't the time for old grievances. The afternoon passed in a surreal blur of medical discussions, awkward silences, and careful navigation around the elephant in the room, our last interaction and everything that had followed. A hospice nurse visited, reviewing medication schedules and comfort measures. My mother dozed frequently, the medication making her drowsy and confused. During one of these naps, my father asked me to join him in the kitchen. Sitting at the table where we'd had so many family meals, he finally addressed what we'd all been avoiding. We're losing the house, he admitted, staring into his coffee mug. Medical bills, second mortgage, credit card debt. It's all caught up with us. The full story emerged gradually. My father had continued working well past when his health allowed, trying to manage their cascading financial problems. When my mother's initial cancer diagnosis came, they had already exhausted their resources and had limited health insurance. The treatments drained what remained of their retirement funds. Now, with the cancer returned and more aggressive treatments recommended, they faced complete financial collapse alongside the medical crisis. Rachel has been living here for almost 2 years, he continued. Says she's helping care for your mother, but he trailed off, the unspoken reality hanging between us. Rachel was still being supported rather than providing support. Why didn't you call me sooner? I asked gently. Before it got to this point, he looked ashamed. Pride. Stubbornness. Your mother insisted we could handle it ourselves. And after what happened, the ultimatum, the things that were said and posted online, I didn't think you'd want to hear from us. I asked about my mother's prognosis and treatment options. The local hospital offered standard care, but there was a specialized cancer center in Boston with an innovative treatment protocol that had shown promising results for cases like hers. The cost, however, was prohibitive without the right insurance, which they no longer had. Later that evening, with my mother asleep and my father dozing in his chair beside her bed, Rachel cornered me in the hallway. So you're back. Now that it's too late to actually help, she said, arms crossed defensively. I came as soon as I knew, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Dad only emailed me 2 days ago, Rachel scoffed. Like you couldn't have called or visited in the past 3 years. You just abandoned the family when we needed you most. Rather than rising to the bait, I asked, how have you been, Rachel? The simple question seemed to throw her. How do you think taking care of Mom, watching Dad work himself into the ground, dealing with bill collectors while you're off becoming some big success story? I heard you've been working at Meredith's boutique. That's good. Part-time, she muttered. The pay is terrible, but it's something, I guess. Our conversation was interrupted by my father calling for help. My mother had woken disoriented and was trying to get out of bed. As I helped settle her, I made my decision. The next morning, I sat down with both my parents while Rachel was out running errands. I laid out my proposal clearly. I would pay for my mother's treatment at the specialized cancer center, arrange for the best oncologists, and cover all related expenses. I would also help them deal with their financial crisis, not by simply handing over money, but by establishing structured assistance with proper boundaries. I'll set up a trust, I explained. It will pay off the immediate debts to stop the foreclosure, cover Mom's medical expenses not handled by insurance, and provide a monthly stipend for living expenses. But I continued, meeting my father's eyes. There will be conditions. Professional financial management of the fund's regular meetings with the financial advisor I'll hire, and complete transparency about spending. My mother, more lucid today, began to object, but my father placed his hand over hers. Diana, he said quietly, we don't have the luxury of pride anymore. This is our daughter offering to help save your life and our home. Turning to me, he asked, what about Rachel? I'll offer Rachel a job at Mitchell Digital's Boston office, I replied. Entry level with the same expectations as any other employee. But first, she needs to complete a financial management program I'll pay for. The cycle has to end, Dad. For all of us. My mother was silent for a long moment, tears sliding down her thin cheeks. Finally she whispered, why would you help us after everything? It was the closest she'd come to acknowledging the ultimatum. The cruel posts, the years of favoritism and manipulation. Because I can, I said simply. And because despite everything, you're still my family. But this time we do it my way, with healthy boundaries and respect. Rachel's reaction when she returned was predictably volatile: accusations of control, complaints about strings attached, and initial rejection of the job offer. But as the reality of the situation sank in, and as she watched our father's relief at having a solution, her resistance gradually weakened. I don't need financial counseling, she insisted. I know how to manage money. Then the program will be easy for you, I countered. But it's non-negotiable. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of arrangements, transferring my mother to the specialized facility, hiring financial advisors to untangle my parents' debt situation, and setting up the trust with clear guidelines. I extended my stay in Boston, working remotely and flying James in for weekends. My mother's treatment began showing positive results almost immediately. Though the cancer remained serious, her prognosis improved from months to potentially years with proper care. My father, relieved of financial stress for the first time in decades, finally began addressing his own health issues. Rachel reluctantly attended the financial management program, initially approaching it with resentment, but gradually becoming more engaged as she learned concepts no one had ever taught her. Her first day at Mitchell Digital was rocky. She clearly expected special treatment as the boss's sister, but my Boston office manager had clear instructions to treat her exactly like any new hire. Before returning to Chicago, I had one final conversation with my father, now looking noticeably better after just a month of reduced stress and proper medical care. "I failed you," he said, as we walked slowly around the local park. "I let your mother favor Rachel. I let the family dynamics become toxic, and I didn't step in when I should have." "I'm sorry, Amber." "You're working on it now," I replied. "That's what matters." "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. "In Chicago with James, with your business?" "I am," I said, realizing how true it was. "I built a life that works for me." "Good," he nodded. "That's good." After a pause, he added, "I'm proud of you, you know. Not just for the success, but for having the courage to choose yourself when we gave you no other option." It wasn't a perfect resolution. My relationship with my mother remained strained. Rachel continued to struggle with entitlement, and years of dysfunctional family dynamics couldn't be erased overnight. But for the first time, there was honesty between us and boundaries that gave me the freedom to love my family without being consumed by their needs. 1 year later, James and I welcomed our daughter Lily into the world. As I held her, marveling at her tiny fingers and trusting eyes, I made a silent promise that she would grow up understanding her intrinsic worth was never conditional on performance or comparison. She would know her boundaries would be respected, her achievements celebrated on their own merit, and her place in our family would never come with a price tag. My father, now semi-retired and healthier than he'd been in years, flew to Chicago to meet his granddaughter. My mother, still in treatment but stable, sent a handmade blanket and a card that simply read, "She's beautiful. Thank you for sharing her with us." Rachel remained in Boston, slowly building a legitimate career at Mitchell Digital, where her natural charm and social skills were finding positive outlets in client relations. Our relationship had evolved into something resembling mutual respect, if not the close sisterhood depicted in greeting cards. The family we had been could never be restored, nor should it be. Instead, we were creating something new from the ashes of ultimatums and broken ties, relationships based on choice rather than obligation, respect rather than manipulation, and love that didn't demand payment to be maintained. Sometimes walking away isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of a better one. Was there ever a time in your life when you had to cut ties with someone toxic even if it broke your heart? Or have you been forced to establish firm boundaries with family members? Share your experiences in the comments. Your story might help someone else facing a similar situation. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be struggling with family ultimatums. Remember, choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the only way to survive and eventually thrive. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength in navigating your own.